In this video, I'll explain how we create a spinal listing from our motion palpation findings. When we motion palpate the spine, we always motion palpate with extension first, rotation second, and lateral bending last. The reason why we do extension first is because that's the first component of a subluxation. When the spinous processes do not approximate, this is a lateral view of a motion segment. When they don't approximate on extension, we say that that vertebra above has shifted posterior relative to the vertebra below. So if this is C4 and this is C5, we say that C4 has shifted posterior. We give it a P for posterior. In the second image here, we've created a scenario where the vertebra above has rotated, the spinous process is rotated to the right relative to the vertebra below. In this case, the spinous process does not want to rotate from right to left when the head is turned to the right. So we say that there is a right rotation restriction. So we're going to give that an R. In the last image here, we see that the patient has difficulty leaning their head to the right. We have to remember there is a disc in between. Okay. So if the patient has difficulty leaning to the right, it creates a wedge. From step 2, we've noticed that the spinous process is rotated to the right, so we drew it in up here, and we noticed that the spinous process is rotated right towards the side of the open wedge. Whenever the spinous process rotates to the open wedge side, we're going to give it an S for superior. So our listing then for C4 is posterior, right, and superior. That lets us know how the spine is misaligned. It also is going to let us know how we adjust the spine. So for example, we need to thrust posterior to anterior to get C4 on top of C5. We need to adjust the spine in such a way that we bring the spinous process from right to left. And we're going to adjust them also in such a fashion that we're going to encourage the disc to close. So we're going to give this patient a clockwise torque. In the second scenario, the same thing. When we perform extension, we notice that the spinous processes do not approximate or come together. When they don't approximate or come together, we say that top vertebra has shifted posterior. So we're going to give it a P for posterior. Now we're going to check for rotation. We see that the spinous process is rotated to the left on C4 over C5. Meaning the spinous process does not want to move or resists movement from left to right when the patient turns their head to the left. So we say that there is a left rotation restriction. So we're going to give it an L. In the last image here, we see that the spinous process of C4 has rotated to the left. But we keep the same scenario where the patient has difficulty leaning their head to the right. Whenever the spinous process rotates to the opposite side of the open wedge, we say that it's in the inferior position, so we're going to give it an I for inferior. So our listing for C4 then is posterior, left, and inferior. When we adjust this patient, we all agree that we need to thrust from posterior to anterior to get C4 on top of C5. We need to bring that spinous process from right to left to align with C5. And then we also need to give this patient a clockwise torque in order to encourage the closing of that wedge. The problem is, however, when we thrust from left to right on that spinous process, we have a tendency to believe that the disc may worsen and open up. So we don't want to do that. So in the Gonstead listing system, anytime you have an I, it's always followed by another letter. And what Gonstead is saying is don't contact the spinous process and push from left to right in this scenario. You want to contact the lamina on the opposite side and bring it from left to right. So your contact, or your segmental contact point, is going to be the lamina on the opposite side. So your thrust will then be posterior to anterior, left to right, with a clockwise torque using the lamina as your segmental contact point instead of the spinous process.